Okay, so I want to welcome everybody to Nevada Volunteers Lunch and Learn today. My name is Shannon Moore. Well, actually, sorry, it's Shannon Arimura. I just got married. I'm forgetting my my last name already. Shannon Arimura, and I am the Volunteer Generation Fund Program Officer for Nevada Volunteers. And I am in charge of ensuring that once a month we are providing training and technical assistance around capacity building around volunteer management within your organizations to help you build. Just so you guys know, for anybody who's brand new and hasn't attended one of these, they are recorded. They are kept in a group where that is open to all volunteer managers and nonprofits throughout the state. So even if you're a volunteer manager, corporate, you're still welcome to join the group, and you'll get a follow-up email to this presentation that will give you the information to join that group. And so today we are talking about executive perspectives on volunteers. And I want to introduce our speaker for the day, Scott.
Hi, everybody.
Scott, you want to tell everybody what you do and then go ahead and get started? I think I lost your picture somehow. I lost your video.
Oh, am I back? Am I there?
Yes, you are.
Okay, good. So I downloaded Teams onto my desktop instead of the web browser, so hopefully it's better.
Okay, oh, let me get in here and mute everybody. Okay, so everyone's muted. Scott, unfortunately, that means you are too. So you'll have to come off real quick. I'm sorry.
There we go.
There you go. Okay, we're good to go.
Well, thanks, everybody. It's such a pleasure to spend some time with you. As Shannon mentioned, my name is Scott Emerson. I currently am a commissioner on Nevada Volunteers, but my real work and effort has been spent in the volunteer sector through the American Red Cross. I was the CEO for the Red Cross here, and been with Red Cross for about 30 years before retiring, and served in a variety of roles. Some people had dubbed me the Paul Revere for volunteer service, which is a title that I hold with great pride, because we did have some of the most highest performing teams in the Red Cross system, which was really cool. And then spent about 9 months at United Way. Currently, I do real estate, something totally different. But I still am engaged in the nonprofit sector. So I still teach management classes for nonprofit executives and stuff at UNLV. I also serve on a couple boards and do a lot of volunteer work myself. So it's always been a state of mind for me. So I just want to share some things with you today. And Shannon, how long do we have, just so I don't go over?
We have until 12:30. Typically leave the last so many minutes, like 20 or so at least, for questions and answers.
Very good. Well, keep me honest on time, if you will. So I'm going to set a timer. Thank you. Well, so there's kind of three things that, after Shannon and I talk, there's kind of three basic things that I kind of want to chat about today. And if you have questions, please pipe up along the way. A lot of what I'm going to share with you has just been a collection of my experience. And I want to preface this by saying you're the expert at what you do in the organization that you do it in. And so I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here just to share some of my perspectives and my experiences in the hopes that maybe it will inform kind of your work, maybe improve your sanity a little bit, depending on what environment you're in. And hopefully, maybe, give you some new ideas and things. So there's kind of three things I want to talk about today. One is executive attitudes about volunteers and kind of understanding the business culture you're in. Because I see a lot of volunteer managers kind of, hit their head against the wall and get frustrated at the environment they're in. The second thing we'll talk about overcoming executive resistance, right? So, how are you going to present solutions to executives and maybe get some traction there? And then also survival skills for you, so you can maintain some of your sanity and just know that, you're not in this journey alone. The good thing is you've joined an alumni of a lot of people who have worked with unpaid staff before and who are there to support you. And we oftentimes get so embroiled in the day-to-day work that we forget that we can actually reach out to each other and do some research, do some sanity check, and that kind of stuff. So lean into each other. So let's first talk about executive attitudes, right? And kind of understanding the business environment that you're in. I would say this as an invitation for the next 45 minutes or so. I am not here to call anybody out, but I am here to call you up because I believe that people are truly born for greatness, but sometimes programmed for failure. Based on our life journey, who we've encountered along the way. Jim Rohn, a business executive, says it best that you are the average of the 5 closest people to you. If you want to change who you are, you change those 5 closest positions. And it doesn't mean that you snip those people out of your life, but you find folks that have fruit on the tree that have actually done what you want to do, surround yourself with them, and you will eventually become part of that average as well, which is a positive thing. The other thing I would say is that from a mindset perspective, charity is your mission, but it's not your business model. And so as we work in our respective organizations, it's important to understand that it is a business at the end of the day, right? From a business perspective, you have to make more money than you spend. You have to have competent people doing the work to get things done. But it's important to know that. The second mindset thing that I think is critical is to think that volunteer is a pay grade, not a job description. And I'll say that again, volunteer is simply a pay grade, not a job description. And so when somebody says, hey, what do you do at XYZ agency? And you go, well, I volunteer there. Well, that's great. You told me how much you get paid, but you still haven't answered the question, right? And so you are in a unique position to really influence with language that culture in your organization. There's no other business that I know of that separates people based on pay grade, right? Most of your business elements separate people based on job duties, but yet we have an HR manager and we have a volunteer manager sometimes. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? Because if we want to create an integrated workforce, integrated team, why are they not one and the same? Well, part of that is because the HR person has spent most of their education and schooling on laws and regulations around compensation, and not so much around building teams and pulling people together, integrating, embracing diversity, even though they may have workshops and stuff. That doesn't mean they're bad people. So please don't take away from this that I'm saying HR people are incompetent. That's not it. They just have a certain skill set that you need to recognize, and that could be very helpful to you. But also recognize that most organizations also hire a volunteer manager just to deal with unpaid staff. And so you kind of have to ask yourself, why is that? And kind of figure that answer out in your organization, right? The other thing I would say is, let's look at the language that's used. Your organization exists to solve a problem. It does not exist to deliver the mission. And that's a different mindset. And some of you may go, whoa, what did he just say? But you're there to solve a problem. And so the language in your organization, is it around people being problem solvers, or is it around people just delivering a mission? And that's a powerful distinction that once you start changing that language, it changes the attitude and behavior. And it also is empowering. So if you have a team that just simply delivers the mission versus solving the problem, you have a different buy-in, right? A different mindset and commitment to the organization. So if at United Way, we actually had a chant that said, we are problem solvers. And so, the team lead would shout out, we are, and then the rest of the team would go problem solvers. And that started to instill a culture that we want you to use your skills and talents. We want you to make decisions. We want you to have meaningful experiences. Because I'll tell you what, most organizations, when I was doing consulting, most of them don't have a recruitment issue. They have an engagement issue. And how do they engage the unpaid staff on their teams? They have an issue with team integration. They don't have an issue with retention. You don't have to do a lot of recognition if you have meaningful engagement. And that might be an aha moment for a lot of you, but there is not a single party you can throw that will overcome upset engagement. or lack of engagement. You just can't do it. You can't compensate, a meaningless experience with a nice party. So, still have the party. That's good, but also know that your key here is that volunteers are the key to abundance, and volunteers or unpaid staff are really the key to the organization solving its problems. Now, your exec may not have that same opinion, right? And so you may be in some workforces where it's kind of expected. But think of this: there is no position in your organization that's reserved for paid staff. Think about that for a minute. There is no position in your organization reserved for paid staff. There are for volunteer staff, and that's your board of directors, right? So your board chair has to be a volunteer, your board members have to be uncompensated, that kind of stuff. And so think about that, and then wonder how that culture doesn't trickle down to the rest of the team, right below the board level. And so that's something very powerful that you can use in your conversations with executives to say, look, I know you already embrace, using unpaid staff because our board is that group of people. And so here's a few questions that I think you can sit down and ask your executive, depending on your comfort level, right? Or if you could even get in front of them, depending on your organization and structure. But here's a few questions that I have found incredibly helpful to kind of gauge the exec's opinions on how they see unpaid staff. So we're not going to use the word volunteer in our discussions. We're going to translate this into a business conversation, right? Because I already told you volunteer is just a pay grade. So here's a couple of questions that I've used before. One is, how does unpaid staff fit into the business plan? Right? How does unpaid staff fit into the business plan? That question right there could be a showstopper for folks, because there may not be intentional integration into the business plan. They may just tolerate volunteers or just think I have to have them for some reason, but don't really embrace them. If you can get unpaid staff built into the business plan, now you have some institutional inclusion that helps set culture, because it's expected. You have to have unpaid staff to be successful. So that's my first question. How does unpaid staff fit in the business plan? The next one is, what has been their experience with unpaid staff, meaning the executive? What has been their experience with it? And you will get all kinds of answers from this question. And it's also going to help to give you insights into their motivation, their experiences, their biases, so that you have actionable intelligence to be able to position yourself in your team, that including. The next one is, what is the most positive experience and what's the worst experience that you've had with unpaid staff? Right? I want to know. I'm going to approach this conversation with intense curiosity. I want to know everything about this exec and their experience with unpaid staff and how it relates to the business. Because if I can understand your why and your motivation, now I can start to formulate how to present things to you to help you solve problems. And the next one is, what kind of teams would they like to build in this organization? How would they like them to function? Because having that information is powerful, because now you can start to package together the value of unpaid staff, the talent that the organization can't afford to buy, but may have access to, and you can help solve the problem, because you have to talk in business terms, right? Again, it's a business, we're solving a problem. How can you package folks together? I've also used another valuable question, that is, well, what is the number one or number two problem that you're trying to solve by having staff in the organization? Because again, staff are there to solve problems. So all of these questions, the suite of questions, will help give you some incredible and powerful insights into the mindset of your executive. And then you can also ask them one final question, that is, how do you see my role helping you solve problems? How do you see my role helping you solve problems? What's beautiful about these few questions, it takes all the guesswork out of it. We spend a lot of energy trying to anticipate or trying to second guess or trying to figure out our executives' opinion on things. Just go ask them. Just have a conversation and go ask them. Most of them are very happy to tell you. If you have 50% of these questions that get answered, you're above average. right? Because a lot of executives haven't thought about this necessarily. And so you may be introducing kind of a new mindset to them. And notice I never use the word volunteer, because the word volunteer can have emotion attached to it based on their experience, and you don't know what their experience has been. So by using the word unpaid staff, you're using a neutral term they probably haven't used before, and you can have a conversation without the emotion. So it may sound small and insignificant, but it's huge in terms of the reception and the impact. So there's a few key questions you can take away and have this, awkward conversation with your executive, right? And depending on the executive you have, if you're uncomfortable, I have a great introduction, and I call it the confessional introduction. And you can just simply say, I'm very uncomfortable about this conversation because I know how important it is, and I also, respect your position. But I also respect the work enough to have this conversation in our relationship enough to talk about this, because I want to be the most effective team player to you that I can be. And so what you've basically done is you confess that this is going to be an awkward conversation for you, and it just kind of gets all that out, right off the bat. It also tells the executive that, hold my hand a little bit here, have some patience with me, have some grace as we talk about these things. It also talks about your willingness to learn and grow and be part of the solution to whatever problems they're trying to solve. And so that confessional introduction can be incredibly powerful to start these conversations and to get the dialogue going. So I'm going to stop there before we talk about observable behaviors a little bit. Having said what I said and kind of about the mindset and stuff, what kind of questions do you have right now? And Shannon, I may need to rely on you to look at the screen and call on people as well. So what's kind of going through your head right now? And it's a safe space here, even though it's recorded.
I don't know, but people are taking notes and you're saying a lot of great stuff. Your comment about the organization exists to solve a problem, was the second part of that not serve a mission?
Yeah, it's about language. So if you say I'm here just to deliver mission, that's kind of a plateau continuum. But solving a problem means we have an endpoint we're headed to. One is a maintenance mindset. The other one is a solution mindset.
Perfect. That was a question.
Yeah. Other thoughts or questions? Shannon says I have at least 3 questions per segment, so she's not going to let me off the hook. All right. Some of you are shy. I know some of you in real life, and I know this is not you, but that's okay. So, okay, well, let's move on then. Okay, maybe you'll have an epiphany as we kind of move forward. After you have this conversation,
you got one. Sorry.
Good.
Okay. What if the business plan mentions volunteers, but not a big focus?
Yeah, so you might have some ancillary mentions about volunteers. What I would say is see where that's plugged into the plan and under what context. If it's just a mention that says, and we're going to use volunteers, that's not very meaningful, right? You can't really, take that for action a lot. So maybe you have a conversation about being involved with the planning process when it comes time to update things, because you have a lot you can lend. When you think about it, you represent the vast majority of staff, because most of them are unpaid in most organizations. And so, from a business standpoint, it's important, I think, that you ask to be included in that planning because you do represent the majority of staff. And think of it from that standpoint and see if you get an invitation to the table.
Awesome. It looks like Mandy has a question. You want to come off mute?
Hey, Mandy.
Hi there. So I have a question in relation to, we're actually mostly volunteers. We're volunteer based, so we're on board with what you're saying, and we've been able to accomplish quite a bit with it. And I know you and I have had a discussion on changing language and things like that. So my question to you is, how do we deliver the message that we are a volunteer-based organization, but deliver it in a positive manner so that the recipient doesn't see it in a negative? Because sometimes there's been a response in that maybe they feel like it's not as stable if it's mostly volunteers versus a paid an infrastructure of paid staff. So I mean, I guess the proof is in the pudding, right? So but people still have that as a concern, I guess.
Yeah, are you talking about donors and funders potentially interpreting that?
Yeah. I mean, when there's discussions about sustainability and volunteer based this whole time, yeah, we are, and we'll still continue operating in that way as we grow. But some people have a different perspective on it, I guess.
Yes, that's a really great question. Thanks. I love your wallpaper behind you.
Starbucks.
Yeah. So I think the conversation is, look, this is the team we have, and so it really the whole paid and unpaid conversation. If you can put that together and say this is our team, if it comes up, this is the size of our team. We have a mixture of paid and unpaid. Or I need you, Mr. and Mrs. Donor, to help us, but help us in a different way. We have the need right now because we're growing to be able to pay, these two key positions, because really what that does is payment gives us consistency, and we need that to grow to the next level. And so I want to invite you as a donor to help us get to that next level. Does that sound like something you could do for us? And so, try to reframe that conversation around paid and unpaid staff. You're right, they do oftentimes, organizations will say, hey, we have no paid staff, and they think that's a real plus. But some people will say, okay, you don't have consistency. I'm concerned about that. And if that donor says yes, say, great, I'd like to ask you to join us for a 3-year period. Here's what I'd like. And so you go in with a multi-year ask, small at first, medium second, and then big at third. And that way you can say, we want you to see how we can produce and how we can solve problems with the investment you're about to make. And we know that you need a comfort zone as well. And so let's do a graduated pledge over the next 3 years. Does that sound like something that you could do? And then don't say another word, because he or she who speaks next loses.
So that's when discussing donations with potential donors, but in the framework of when you're discussing the model of your operational model, to just generally, and we say that we're volunteer based almost 100% actually, but how can we phrase that or express that to where there's peace of mind that we do have stability in our infrastructure in the way that we're structured?
Yeah, great question. So I would change that conversation. I would stop talking about how much volunteers you have and how effective you are with that, because that can be open to interpretation based on the person you're talking to and whether that's stable or not. I think the way to counter that is to focus on the results you've had and say, we've been able to accomplish X, Y, and Z. I need your help to do X so that we can accomplish this next thing. And so you're going to focus that conversation on results, not on the business infrastructure. I'd say about 80% of your donors will be very open to that conversation, because you want to have that results-based conversation, not an infrastructure conversation, right? Because the donors aren't there to really manage the infrastructure. And so don't bring that into the conversation yourself to open that door. If it opens, you can be reactive to it then. And you can talk about, we have a mixture of, contract, paid, unpaid. We have a team. We've been able to very effectively manage that and operationalize that team to get these results. And you can just kind of flip that right back to the results again. So that's really what the donor wants. The donor wants results, right? And you've got a great track record already, because I know you and I've talked. So use that track record as a almost a diversion, if you will.
All right, thank you so much.
Great question, though. Okay, well, let's kind of, any more questions, Shannon, on the board there?
Nope.
Okay, let's move forward then. So let's talk about, so after I have this conversation with an exec, right, the next thing I want to invite you to do is look for the observable behaviors and evidence that support what they just told you. And you'll often find a disconnect, right? I have yet to help an organization where what practically happened on the ground was aligned with what management thought was happening. There's always a disconnect there, right? There's a variant. And so look for observable behaviors. And here's a few that will help you either confirm or show a departure from the intended culture. So now that we know what the boss wants, let's see what's actually happening. So here's a few of the things that I would observe in organization. And the reason I love observations is because they tell you oftentimes more truthfully what's occurring. It's like when people say, oh yeah, I've got lots of money, I'm good, but you go to their house, this week and their thermostat's set to 85. You're poor. If your thermostat is set to 85, you're poor. If it's cranked down to 60, you got money to burn, And so, that observation can help me reinforce what they say about themselves. Same thing in your world. So here's a few things that I look out for when I'm observing things. First one, how much budget is allocated to supporting the team? And that can be paid and volunteer, but how much budget is supporting the team? I've had execs that have really embraced this and said, yes, we have to invest in infrastructure. The smart execs, the ones that are successful, invest quite a bit into infrastructure, including their teams. And notice I didn't say paid or volunteer, just investment in their teams. And so what kind of budget allocation is there for that? The next one is space layout. If you have a physical office, do you just have enough desks or cubicles or workspaces for the paid staff, or do you have extra for everybody to work at? So at the Red Cross, we have 17 cubicles and 6 offices and a couple conference rooms. Out of those 17 cubicles, 3 were occupied by paid staff. The rest were dedicated for anybody else that came in, the unpaid staff. Every single day, almost all those cubicles were full. And so we gave people meaningful jobs. They had schedules. We held them to accountability standards. Yes, sometimes we wrote them up and put them on probation. Sometimes we fired them. It's no different if you're paid or unpaid. You support the team and you have accountability the same exact way. And so do you have the space allocated to actually support the team that your organization wants? The other one is resource allocation. This comes into like computers and whatever mechanisms or tools that you have, user accounts for certain systems. Each person should have their own user account for any electronic system because it allows for accountability. And so if something happens, you can track it back to a single user. I've seen organizations that have used generic emails for projects, and that's totally fine, provided everybody has access to that email, and that's from a security standpoint, that's tracked in some way. And so, what's observable? What are you looking for? The other thing is, let's say you've had this conversation, and the exec says, "I really want this inclusiveness with the team. I want paid and volunteer staff to get together." So my observable behavior would be what kind of training goes on continuously to reinforce that culture. And in most organizations, it's nothing, right? In most organizations, you start as maybe a service provider. Because you showed up more than anybody else, you get promoted to be a supervisor. And then if people like you, you become a manager. Nowhere along the way, maybe have you gotten any training on how to do any of this. And then you become a director just because nobody said anything differently. And then before long, you're in a leadership position, but you have no idea if what you're doing is effective or if it's correct or incorrect. It's just nobody has stopped you before, right? And so that inertia just carries forward. In a high-performing environment, there will be training all the time, and you shouldn't have to make it mandatory. If you have to make something mandatory, then that tells me something about culture as well. I had a friend once that said, you don't have to go to this, you get to go to this. And so if you approach your workforce with that kind of attitude, you know what, this is a privilege. We get to do this. And if you use incentives like if you perform or if you show up so many times, then you get access to my time, or maybe we go out to lunch together. But there's incentives along the way that reward behavior. We spend too much time trying to fix people or trying to compensate for the shortfalls. The shortfalls are the shortfalls. Forget about those. Put team members together that complement each other, that account for those shortfalls, and build a team so that you don't have to tolerate the non-performers. Right? We've all been in a position where we've had one or two people filling a position, and we're just like every day, please, baby Jesus, let them show up. Let them do their work. Let them not say they're going to leave. Well, that is a scarcity mindset. And so I want you to think for a moment. You have unlimited staff, so why are you putting up with that? You have unlimited staff if you stop and think about it. You have the ability to attract people, not recruit them, because nobody's ever been recruited for something they like, right? So you're going to attract people to the organization, and you're going to fill positions so you don't have to tolerate the non-performers. And when you start approaching your business that way and you start getting people that are attracted to your organization, I tell you, it is a wonderful thing. You want to jump up and down every morning. You want to go to work. You want to be excited about things. It is just an amazing environment. And guess what? The high performers start to enforce accountability for the low performers. And so it gets to the point where you don't have to handle a lot of that small, petty stuff. My staff got me a sign once from my office that said, "No recreational whining allowed." And I loved it. Because what they meant by that is, come in with a solution. Let's be problem solvers. Let's commit to doing things. If you're talking to somebody and they say, "I don't know," that's a great conversation and assessment of your knowledge, but it doesn't tell me what you're going to do. Whereas if I'm talking to somebody and they say, "Hey, let me find that out and get back to you," now there's ownership in that. And so those observations can tell you a lot about culture. When somebody does something nice, do you say, "I appreciate it," or "I appreciate you"? Because if I say, "I appreciate it," you've now objectified them and their work. If you say, "I appreciate you," you've now made a connection. And that connection will serve you very well. We had volunteers the day I left the Red Cross, we had 743 local volunteers registered in our system. Now, about 100 of those gave regular service, about once a month. Right? The rest were kind of in a reserve status, I would say. They came in and out for things. But we had about 100. And so we could focus on those 100. I had some that would come in 3 and 4 days a week, and they were there more than the paid staff sometimes. And they certainly lasted longer than paid staff, right? They also are more trustworthy. They also give more to the organization. So there's a lot of bonus to that. Did you know if you go back and look at most thefts or issues with organizations, about 99% of the time it's the paid staff. It's not the volunteers, it's the paid staff. And so that might be a good talking point if your exec has trust issues. Our volunteers did accounting. They took the money, they accounted for it, they made deposits. Because we had systems in place and checks and balances, we relied on those systems. And those systems worked for us. And so I didn't have to, I didn't have to be worried that the people in the system might do something because we already had the checks and balances in place. We always monitored. Don't get me wrong. We didn't just set it and forget it. But it was amazing when we had that kind of environment. So what kind of training is happening for the team? We used to do what we called staff development Fridays. Fridays were kind of a slower day for us, especially many years ago when most municipalities went up to 410s and they were closed on Friday. Now they're back open to 5 days a week, but still, Friday was kind of a down day for us. And so every single Friday, we would do a small educational seminar. Again, not required, just optional. We would typically do a 3 to 4 hour session. We would do one in the morning, then repeat in the afternoon, so that if people couldn't attend in the morning, they could in the afternoon, or if departments needed coverage, they could do that. You know what our first session was? How to work the copy machine. It sounds crazy. It was the most well-received session ever. We repeated it 4 or 5 times. We had the guy that actually services the copy machine come in, and people were like, "Oh my gosh, this is the greatest tool ever. It's like chitty chitty bang bang. It can do 2,000 things, but we all just use it to print and copy." And so it really made a lot of their life easier just simply by knowing how to use the tool. And so we would do things like that. Then we would also get into leadership training as well. right? How to have uncomfortable conversations, how to manage to results, how to set expectations, how to reinforce culture. So they were many snippets so people could process them and then put them into work. But it was amazing. And then we started opening up to other organizations to come as well. And that was a great cross-pollination because our teams got to work with other teams from other local organizations. And it was just a really cool symbiotic environment because everybody has the same problem when it comes to teams and managing teams, supporting teams. So why not combine forces, invite them and get some of that crosstalk going? It's amazing. Because I tell you what, the unpaid staff, the volunteers, they're not yours. It's a way of life for them. They volunteer in multiple places, most likely. And so don't be afraid they're going to walk. I never was. I would help them if they needed to develop, skills and then go out and go somewhere else. And they always came back because of the environment that we had. The other thing I would say is look at, I already talked about the difference between HR management and volunteer management, but how does that structure look, right? And so do you have somebody that is inclusive that works with both paid and unpaid staff? Because I tell you what, there is no difference except for the pay schedule. So when you look at your team handbook, we stopped having a volunteer handbook and a paid staff handbook because ideally they're exactly the same except for the compensation section. That's it. So you don't have to maintain two different manuals. They should be exactly the same because your team manual or staff handbook, however you want to call it, sets forth and codifies some of the working relationship and expectations you have in the organization. It shouldn't matter what you get paid. You need the same deliverables to make the team work. So if you can draw together and have just one team handbook, that says inclusion. There's a couple other small things too that really set culture. One is name tags, believe it or not. So I've seen organizations where the paid staff had engraved name tags and the unpaid staff would have a label maker, right? So you have Betsy's name tag, but somebody just put a label maker over it and now it's Jim's name tag. What message does that send, right? The name tag is what, $2 or $3? What you said is you're not worth $2 or $3. And also because I'm using a label maker, I don't think you're going to stay. And so these are all badges of membership, right? And so when you do these things, when you don't give them a workspace to work, when you don't give them their own kind of computer account, when you don't give them an engraved name tag, people love the stuff that hangs on lanyards, card keys and laminated things with their photo on it and ID cards and that kind of stuff. If everybody doesn't have the same thing, then you're talking about division, not inclusion. I want you to think for a moment the division environment you're working in and why it's so hard to develop inclusive teams. When you were young, one of the first things you're taught is how to group things together. And then as you grow up, you're taught to spot the anomaly. What's the odd one out, right? Here's 6 little green teddy bears and here's a blue one. Which one is different? You're going to separate that out. And so even early on, before you even go to school, you're taught how to divide things up and group things together and exclude differences. And then as you grow up, you have schools and they have teams and mascots. And then what happens? You're taught to not like this rival. You don't even know who they are. Chances are you've never met any of them, right? But you're taught to really have a dislike for this group. And then when they come to play at your place, right, there's chants and there's things that you throw out in the crowd in terms of slurs and that kind of stuff to try to intimidate them. Again, you don't even know who they are. When you look at Chamber of Commerce and business, nobody markets their likeness. Everybody markets their differences. So they exploit the minute differences to show how different the community is. And then every day on TV, you're taught, here's this certain product that's different from everything else. And so we are surrounded and bombarded every day by an environment and society that exploits differences. This is why it's so hard to be inclusive, because you are fighting a tsunami of reinforcement of separation every single day. So you have to do things in your team deliberately to set the inclusion. And that comes in the training, and it also comes in the accountability. So as soon as you see something that's not, that's not compatible with this vision and these values that you want to create, you got to nip it in the bud. You got to say, I'm sorry. I understand that you may not even realize that I also respect our relationship enough to bring this to your attention, but that behavior is just not acceptable here when you're working. I'm not here to tell you what to do in your life, but I'm saying when you're here under this banner, under this organization, this is the acceptable behavior. Because people don't bring that naturally. They're just saying common sense is not so common. No, it's not. And most people never trained to it to make it common, right? And so take the observable behaviors, take the conversation with the exec, try to get alignment in those as best as you can. And the best influence you have is demonstrate it yourself. Because believe it or not, you're a big thing. You've made it. You've got the position you have positional authority, you have influence. Demonstrate what you want done. And then you start to attract people, and others will say, damn, Lisa really, this is awesome. She's got this awesome team going on, and this really rocks. So I want to know how you did that. How do you do that? So having said that, I want you to think for a moment about your team. Because like I said, the biggest influence you can have is just self-demonstration. So with your team, if you're a volunteer manager, because that's the title, right? We already know that you're here to work with unpaid staff, but you also have to integrate that with paid staff as well to make these teams. In your specific team and unit, do you have people to help you go through applications, conduct interviews, do placements, job placements, assign individuals who want to come and volunteer their time with jobs that need to be done to solve problems in the organization? In 60 days, are you actually following up with them to say, hey, how's your experience been? Can they work in more than one position at a time? If so, how many? And what they'll learn is each one of those experiences will be completely different because of the manager in that team. Right? And so you want to bring consistency to that experience as much as possible. That doesn't mean the work's not different, but the experience is positive and consistent. So think about that. We all know that you have to go through 10 to 20 interested persons to fill one position. If you don't know that, there's a period of enlightenment for you right there, right? So, how many positions do you need to fill? How many shifts or whatever? Multiply that times 10. That's how many people you've got to go through to get that. And if you don't have a system built for that, then you're going to be banging your head against the wall. You cannot deny the numbers. They are what they are. So master the data. So do you have a team of 15 or 20 that does all that? We developed a team. That's the first thing we did when I came to this local chapter of the Red Cross. Is we developed a team of about 20 people to do nothing but intake, placement, interviews, etc. And so again, it's going to be the exact same process that you have for paid staff. You're just not going to negotiate compensation because that's already done. That's it. Your positive and accurate placements are going to reduce the problems you have to deal with. I won't eliminate them. There's always unknowns. But if you've got good placement based on skills and values, then that's going to eliminate probably 80 to 90% of your performance issues. It's also going to build you social capital that you can use when it's time to discuss things that aren't working well. So demonstrate this yourself. Build this team. So, how many of you have a team like that you use now, and kind of what's your experience been with that? Enough of me talking for a moment. Let's hear from you. How many of you have a team or have been around a team like that, and what's been that experience like? Silence.
I'm laughing because I'm just thinking you might not get a whole lot of a whole lot of response because I've been doing nonprofits since I was 18 years old. And I can honestly tell you, I have never had an executive level person talk about volunteers in this way. It's like volunteers are these people over here, and they, they're not treated as part of the team. They're not integrated. They're not like all of these things that you are saying are, I mean, literally amazing, but you're probably one of the only executives I've ever heard say it in all of my experience. And so I don't know that a lot of people have experienced it because I know I haven't. But if somebody has, correct me. Yeah, we had somebody that says I'm the only one that manages volunteers and we have 150 to 200 every year.
Great. So here's the thing. I want to change your language. You support volunteers. We don't manage them. And again, management becomes an asset type conversation, whereas support becomes a servant leadership position. Right? I'm here to support, I'm here to empower. And so it's a subtle change. And don't feel bad for using that term. I don't know who put that in there, but don't feel bad about that because that is the commonplace, right? That's the environment that most of us walk into because that's the experience we bring to the table. But here's your opportunity to change that now. So now you can go back, and the first thing I'd say is start building a team for yourself. Think about this. How awesome would it be that when you went on vacation, all the work still got done? And you didn't have to answer emails or take phone calls or anything else when it's off-duty time, right? And so, in the next 6 months, make a commitment to build a team, whatever that looks like for you, to support your work. Honestly, take your job description and farm it out to everybody, right? Recruit individuals so you don't have to do anything. The smartest volunteer, team leader that I've ever seen doesn't have to do any of their job directly. They spend most of their time, about half of their time, they spent directly supporting the team, checking in on them, getting them the resources they need. And guess what? They spend a quarter of their time, that's 2 hours a day, on personal development. Because we get so busy trying to serve the organization or trying to fill positions or deal with issues that we forget to develop ourselves. And the easiest way out of this churn, out of this crazy cycle, is to surround yourself by those 5 people I talked about. So be thoughtful about those 5 and personal development. One of my questions for staff when they tell me, oh yeah, I do, I love to grow and learn, I say, what book are you reading right now? And the answer I get most of the time? I don't have time. I'm not reading something. If you don't master your own time, then you are subject to the whims of everything else around you. So I would say one of the other things you can do, in addition to building this volunteer support team for yourself, to demonstrate that volunteers can be trusted and there's high skills that can come to the organization, is to commit yourself to some personal development. Maybe it's 30 minutes a day to start with. But that is sacred time, absolutely sacred time. So here's a few of the books that I've read over some time that may help you and may help you develop. Everybody takes different things away from them, but every successful leader reads books. I didn't say audiobooks. That's like conference calls or video calls, right? You multitasking, you're not paying attention when you listen to an audiobook. I know because I do it too, right? So here's a few books that I have done and used before. So one of them is this one called What Got You Here Won't Get You There by Marshall Goldsmith. Okay. It's a great book that talks about you've really invested in yourself. You've got some great skills. You somehow impressed the person that was interviewing you. You might be faking it till you make it right now, whatever your environment may be, right? But it's a great book. So what got you here won't get you there. It's also an easy read. All of these are pretty easy reads because I like easy read books, right? The next one is called Atomic Habits. Okay, and this talks about reforming habits within yourself, recognizing the things that are stealing your potential. And it gives you some really great simple guides to say, hey, here's this behavior. This is something you can do to change that behavior if you want to, right? And so none of these are saying, you absolutely must do something. They're just saying, here's how to do it if you want to. Another one is The Go-Giver. It's a short read. See, it's small, but it's also a great mindset book as well to just kind of make you sit back and go, huh, okay. And then two more. One is John Maxwell. I'm a big John Maxwell fan. I've actually met with him. I spent some time with him. He's a former preacher. He still's a preacher, I guess, and still does some preaching. But he's trained, not only business leaders but government leaders around the world on how to be more efficient and effective. This one is everyone communicates, few connect. Right? Everyone communicates and few connect. And this talks about how we can get the most out of our conversations. You've all experienced some of this. I bet you've met an old friend or a colleague, like, hey, we should really go to Starbucks soon. And you say, yeah, that'd be great. And that's it. And then what, 6 months later, you still haven't had coffee with them. Right? And so this is a way to connect and get action and really get that going. And then the last one I would suggest is Failing Forward, another John Maxwell book. And so, his premise is there is no failure. There is, success and learn. The only time you fail is when you give up. And so failure is part of the recipe of learning. And I would say that's another, when I look at businesses and culture, I look to see what is their risk-taking potential or attitude, and is failure part of the solution? Junior CEOs and managers will work their darndest to avoid failures because they think it's something bad, it's something to be avoided. Experienced and mature executives will embrace that and say, if you're not failing at least once a month, you're not doing enough, right? That is part of the recipe, and I'm prepared to support you in that. And so failing forward is key to being able to grow. That includes growing personally and growing your business as well. So unpaid staff is the key to abundance, folks. That's what it is. So survival techniques for you, right? Let's hit this third bullet point. Number one is personal development. We talked about that. The second one is actually building your own volunteer team, right? So that you can farm out a lot of your responsibilities. Make sure that you have multiple people that do the same thing so you don't have to tolerate lack of performance. And things happen to people in life too, right? That affect their availability and turnover. Everyone's going to have turnover, so that's fine. Just constantly look at why people are leaving to see if there's a trend there. So the other thing I would say is don't forget that you're not in this alone. And this is probably one of the biggest survival techniques that I know. And that is network with each other. If you see all the people on the call here and you don't know at least a couple people, make that a commitment in the next few months to actually get to know them. Take them to lunch. Go break bread together, as they say, right? And go get to know one another. You're probably having the same struggles, and the struggle is real. And you also can see trends, so you can react to that. But more importantly, you're educating yourself on the market. And you can go back and bring that as a strength to your executive and say, look, I've been talking to 6 other, volunteer managers, right? That's the term we probably have to use at that point because that's the term, that's the title. But I talked to 6 other folks. This is what they're seeing in the community. That is very valuable intelligence now for your executive, because your executive doesn't have time to go do that. And so that's something you can bring to the table, is current market activity when it comes to unpaid staff. And now you're valuable to the team because now you can help problem solve and you're bringing current market data to them. So the last thing I would say is don't forget that you don't have to deliver every message in one conversation to your leadership. It doesn't have to be you that says it. So maybe you invite someone like me or somebody like Shannon or somebody else to come into the organization and have a chat with the leadership team about attitude and volunteerism. Or maybe we can deliver messages that you can't, right? Because you have to show up every day. We don't. We can say something, and if they're offended, we leave. We go home. But the message is out there now. And what I've noticed is once you put it out there, even if it's not well received, it starts to germinate after a while. And a lot of people just have to process things that way. And so use outside experts to actually come and visit with your teams to talk about things. I had, great intense resistance at United Way behind using volunteers, believe it or not. You'd think we were the leader in that, but we weren't. And so I brought in 6 people, talked about volunteer service, who kind of gave people a vision of what it could be like. And then at the very end, we disclosed who was paid and who was unpaid. And up to that point, you couldn't tell the difference. Everybody in the room assumed they were all paid, but they weren't. Some of the most senior leaders I had in that room as a guest were unpaid. And so ideally, you should be replicating yourself, dividing your job, assigning and delegating your job, and supporting your team. And so maybe having somebody from the outside come in is a better way to have some of these conversations. It all depends on the reception you have with your exec and also, honestly, the type of exec you have. And if you discover that, things aren't receptive or, that didn't go so well, just acknowledge that. It doesn't make you bad. It doesn't make them bad. It just makes it the wrong time, maybe, to do some things. So this is a journey about solving problems for the organization and helping the people you serve solve problems they have. And sometimes it doesn't mean it's a place for us to try our special program or our thing we want to do, because it may not align with the business plan. So you may not have support for it. So don't take this the wrong way, but it's not about you. And it's not about me. Right? It's about solving the problem. That's why we're all here. So focus on mission, focus on solving problems, and you may have a little bit different conversation with your exec. So. And go to drinks with each other. It's a great survival technique as well. Whatever drinks means to you. So that's a lot of kind of just mindset and thought. It's a lot about orienting your mindset to solving problems, to the business aspect of things, not so much the soft skills of making people feel warm and fuzzy. What's kind of going through your head right now? I want to hear from you.
We did have one question in the chat earlier where they asked if the volunteer department should fall under HR. Should the volunteer department fall under HR?
Well, ideally, you don't have a volunteer department. Ideally, you have one unit that serves the team, and you have integrated, terminology for that. And you may have, staff dedicated to doing the employment piece and another staff dedicated to doing the unpaid piece. But ideally, those are all merged into one. I've seen them different ways. I've seen them where you have an HR department and then you have a volunteer department and they're equal. I've seen them where HR supervises the volunteer piece. That sometimes has mixed results only because, again, that HR person may not have the volunteer bug, right? They may not have that same kind of culture that you have and that understanding that you have. And so there sometimes is this cultural collision between the two. And trying to get the HR person to understand volunteerism. I actually had a board member who is a pretty well-known HR specialist that helps a lot of nonprofits in town actually tell me at the United Way that I could not use volunteers in the office because it violated the Fair Labor Standards Act. That is absolutely 100% incorrect, by the way. But she is incredibly well respected. She works with lots of volunteer organizations, but she's just wrong. And so, it was my job to help educate her, which didn't go so well, especially her being a board member. But, that there are things that says, you can't necessarily replace paid staff with volunteers under certain circumstances, but there's absolutely nothing to restrict you from growing and using volunteers in your organization. That's just silly. But that just is an example of difference of mindset and understanding. So work with what you've got and try to educate those around, and hopefully they will eventually see the fact that, really there's more similarities here than differences, and maybe we should, have this more integrated than different separate departments. Another observable behavior is, does your organization have volunteer meetings? Why in the hell do you do that? Basically, you're creating a second-class citizen for them. Right? Because what you're saying is, I'm grouping folks together based on their pay grade, not their tasks or their solution capacity. So what you should be having, right, are team meetings. Maybe you have team meetings around departments or programs, but it's all inclusive. It's paid and volunteer, right? And so you again can drive that behavior. You can help say, you know what, let's stop having separate meetings based on pay grade and let's talk about, role in the organization. Because if you have separate meetings based on pay grade, you have two different understandings now, because the paid staff have one kind of thing they're marching towards, the volunteer staff may have another, and they're not going to be in sync. Whereas if you have a department meeting for business operations and that handles the internal functions, we have paid and unpaid staff coming in. That also sends a strong message that, hey, you're important enough to be included in stuff from both sides. So try to avoid those things that we seem to do a lot that create that division. And understand you may have limited success at some of this. So, don't feel like it's a failure if you try some of this and it doesn't work at first. So what's going through your mind? There's a lot of people on here. You all are thinking, because I can see you. Some of you more than others. And push back. If you don't believe what I say, push back. I'm not here to tell you what to do, and I'm just sharing experiences.
Well, I know you got people thinking, because there's lots of comments, people talking about needing to prioritize personal development, thanking you for the book recommendations, and a couple people that were talking about getting ready to update a volunteer manual, and now they're rethinking it. So people are getting a lot of stuff out of this, whether they're opening their mouths now or not.
This is a penalty-free zone, people. No judgments here. If you're thinking it, 3 or 4 other people are too. So.
Someone missed the second to last book recommendation.
Let's see, second to last. A couple. It could be The Go-Giver, one, or Everyone Communicates and You Connect. Are either of those the books we're talking about?
I think so, because somebody else answered the question too in the chat.
Oh, you're good.
You can hog the time as much as you want. Ask all the questions that you have.
Yeah.
Yes, I will make sure I have the lists of books, and I will put them on Basecamp for everybody.
Cool. And I'm also committed to Shannon to get a few of those key questions written down. So I'll probably just do a quick Word document and ship off to her so she can share that with you all as well. So when you're having those executive conversations, you have at least a pool of questions to start with, and then make them your own. Maybe those are the wrong questions for you and your organization. That's fine. Yes, Mandy. You're live and on the air. Thank you. Go off mute.
Shannon said I can hog the time, so I always just have a lot of questions. So one thing that I struggle with, and Jamie's on the call as well, she's our volunteer manager for our organization, is that we've had, because basically everyone's a volunteer, I struggle with what information gets shared with who, and it's been difficult to draw the line of, well, this person's involved in that, so then maybe they should know. Well, actually, how in a structure like that do we go based off job description? Certain people are privy to certain information, even though they are an unpaid staff member. Do we make that delineation ahead of time? We just find that sometimes, just to avoid problems, that just because there's so many people involved sometimes on one project, and you don't want to start gossip wheels and all these things. So it's just like, maybe we just draw the line on information that gets transferred over to volunteers.
Yes, I would say the first thing is in your handbook, I would say that you have a principle that information is shared based on a business need, right? And so that's part of your culture, is information is shared on a business need to know basis. That also will help with your confidentiality and may help with your gossiping. The second thing I would say is that you should have a job description for every person you engage. At the Red Cross, we would allow them to have up to 5 at one time. Information sharing was based on the job descriptions and that table, and so it was not arbitrary. It was very purposeful. And so our table of organization had unpaid as well as paid positions integrated into it. And then they usually had project managers of some type, and then information was shared based on that table of organization, not based on the individual. So just clarifying that structure will help probably ease your burden of who do I share what with, right? So. And then same way with any kind of Basecamp or Monday or Trello or any of those platforms about projects, you assign access based on their job description and their role. And there's generally one common folder that everybody has information access to, this general policy stuff and practice, and then there's discrete groups for the projects they're working on. And some people you're never going to satisfy either. Some people want to know everything all the time, and that's just not reality. And that's where you just have a conversation to say, our procedure here is to share information based on business need to know. And it's not based upon you as an individual, it's based upon the role you have in the organization. So if you want to know information X, are you telling me that you'd like to assume that role and responsibility, and we'll get you assigned a job? And then they'll usually go, well, no, that's okay, I have enough. Okay, great. But you've cured the problem now, and you've very clearly articulated that information is shared on business needs to know.
I love your comeback, Scott.
I would say they're 80% well received, and then there's the other 20% that's mixed. So you're never going to keep everybody happy all the time. I tell folks, if you don't have someone unhappy with you every month, then you're probably not doing your job, because if you're in the role of accountability, that just comes with it. That's not giving you permission just to be, crazy and a tyrant, but it's the reality of just dealing with people.
So in the chat, someone said at the beginning, you said charity is the mission, but not the business model. You must make more than you spend. You must have competent people. Was there more to that I missed? I'm not.
No, that was the basic gist of it. We sabotage our own success oftentimes because we think, oh, we're a charity, we're a nonprofit, we either can't pay much for a position, or I'll never attract people that have the skills. That mindset is automatically going to get you the results that you're thinking, which is bad, right? And so what I want you to do is just turn that around and say, our goal is, in a volunteer manager role, our goal is not here to engage people that have free time. Our role is to find people with very specific skill sets and match them with the needs of the organization. That's what our role is, which means not everybody that comes to us may have a place in our organization, because you may not need every skill set. And you have to be okay with turning people away. That's why you do interviews. Just like paid staff, you don't hire every single person that applies. People would think that's crazy, but yet on the volunteer side, there's an expectation that you might engage every person that comes along. That's just silly, and it's going to drive you nuts. You're going to have nothing but problems to deal with. So our role in the volunteer manager, volunteer support role, is to match people with skills and open positions so they have meaningful engagements. Just a different mindset. Other questions, thoughts, epiphanies?
I have a question. So you've been talking a lot about, not separating people and volunteers based on, the fact that they're volunteers from paid staff and whatnot. How do you suggest handling expectations when it comes to paid staff versus volunteers, knowing that people are willingly giving you their time and they're not being paid for that, but you want to have certain expectations, but you kind of almost feel like you almost can't require too much of them. And I guess as an example, our big fundraiser earlier in the year, we put together kind of a committee to organize this fundraiser, and the people who were involved in the committee, we had certain expectations of their involvement and what they were going to be doing, and a lot of them kind of fell flat on that. And I think at times we kind of felt like, well, like they're volunteers, so we don't want to like push too hard on them, but we need them to do basically what we thought they understood they were there to do. So how do you kind of separate that and get and kind of drill that importance when it's a volunteer versus a paid person?
Jamie, thank you so much for that question. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Here's the solution. Your expectations should not be different. Our mindset sometimes that we should accept less accountability because someone's not getting paid is what's going to sabotage your program, and that non-performance will spread like a cancer to your team, and the high performers will go somewhere else, and so you'll just end up with more and more issues. It's a downward spiral. And so, what I would say is you should have the exact same expectations. You should have a job description that says here's the expectations, and also here's the authorities you have to get the job done. You should be checking in, or the supervisor should be checking in with them regularly to see if they're meeting milestones. And if they're not, let's see why they're not. And so that you're not surprised at the end of the project that things aren't getting done. And so you do not shy away from them because they're not getting paid. They're in a position of privilege in the organization. They get to serve, they don't have to serve, but with that comes the responsibility that they're going to perform. Right. And it's not because of you, it's not because of the exec, it's because the people that we serve deserve to have this problem solved. We need people with very specific skill sets and accountabilities to do that. I hope you're that person. Are you that person? And you just hit it head on. And if they're not performing, say, share with me what's going on. I've noticed X, Y, and Z, and you articulate the observable behavior. I noticed you missed the last 3 meetings and you didn't have, the plan done or whatever the project was. Tell me what's going on there. And so you approach that with empathy and intense curiosity to find out what's going on. It's called appreciative inquiry. There's actually a title for it. And you'll be surprised what they tell you. And sometimes they go, I just haven't had the time, or I haven't gotten to it, or something else. But you can understand their why. And once you can do that, then you can figure out if they should stay in that role, and you can give them additional resources and they succeed, or they have a different role so that you don't have expectations of somebody doing something that they're not. The other reality is with any team, it's like a school project where there's 5 of you on the project. What happens? 1 or 2 of you does all the work, and the rest of you go, "Yay, good job!" That's real life, and so you have that in your project as well. So plan on that, and I would say double staff it. So that you have redundancy. So again, you don't have to tolerate the lack of performance. But my invitation to you is to not shy away of them because they're unpaid. Step into the organization because the people you're serving deserve to have the best engaged. They deserve to have the work done. And we hope that's you. So. Another very uncomfortable conversation that I have sometimes, and this is usually at the very end when things aren't going to go well, but you need resolution to it. When we have this discussion for maybe the 3rd time and they're still not performing, I'll say, help me understand. I just don't quite understand, because when you interviewed for the position, right, we said we needed X done. You said you had the ability to do X. So I just have one question. Were you misrepresenting your skills, or are you lying to me now? And man, that just hits people in the gut. They're like, "Whoa, what the hell?" Yeah, I just need to know so that we can make some business decisions. It's not emotional. And I've had about 50% of the time people snap and really come to and deliver. And then I've had other people that have self-selected to leave, which is fine because they're not doing the work anyway right now, right? So you haven't lost anything. So again, that's my 3rd conversation, not my first one. My first one is appreciative inquiry, and then it gets a little more direct as we go along. So think about this: when you were working on something and you weren't being successful, did you know you weren't being successful? Most of us had that sense, right? And did you hope that somebody would give you a life preserver to get you out of that uncomfortable situation? For most of us, we'd say yeah. So if you respect somebody, why would you leave them in that position where they're not performing they're feeling miserable. If you truly appreciate them, you'll give them that lifeboat, and that might be that uncomfortable conversation to allow them to self-select out, or give them the resources they need to do the job. Maybe they don't have access to stuff. But you deserve to have that conversation, and they deserve it. So, great question, Jamie. So, and it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but once you do it once or twice, guess what happens to the rest of the folks? They start talking. They're like, man, Jamie means business. You know, she really wants us to be successful, but she's also going to hold us accountable. So we need to step up our game. So you only need to do that once or twice usually, and then word spreads. Other thoughts, questions? And if you don't want to confess, maybe you say, hey, I have a friend that has this issue. We can do that too.
Nobody else has questions for Scott?
I have a question. This is Elsa.
Okay. Yes.
Hi. Yeah. So you mentioned, I think in response to Jamie, that like something about a supervisor. So I was just curious. And then you were also talking about how like a volunteer manager does no direct work or something. So are you kind of suggesting like an organizational strategy where like various paid staff are then in charge of unpaid staff that kind of fit within that under that department or those types of jobs? Is that kind of what you're suggesting? Because I've always thought like a volunteer manager is like, I have to train and manage all the volunteers regardless of kind of what they're up to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So in a perfect world, right? Let's say you're the volunteer manager. You have this team of volunteers that are working on your team. They're doing basically all your job duties so that you can support and check in with them. Your volunteer unit, your volunteer support unit, should be doing the interviewing and placing for the positions that are identified by the rest of the staff in the organization. And when I say staff, I mean paid and volunteer, right? And so you're doing that placement. When somebody seems to be a good fit, you're going to do that orientation to the organization, not to their job, but you're going to give them the holistic kind of thing. That's where you're going to set expectations. Jamie's going to talk about accountability, and we're going to set some of these expectations forward. And then you hand them off to that supervisor. And that supervisor, whether they're paid or volunteer supervisor, right? Because supervisors might be unpaid, that's fine. They then give them what's called the job induction. And they're the ones that's actually going to train that individual to do that specific job, not you at the volunteer unit, because you don't know that specific job, right? It's almost impossible for you to do that. And so they do that job induction, and then you round back around with that placement, in whatever time frame you determine, to say, hey, how was the job induction? How did things go? And then you're going to learn there if there's any deficiencies in the support system, and then you can go back and have those conversations with those supervisors to say, hey, I talked to James. We placed him in your team, 3 weeks ago. He feels like he really doesn't understand what he's doing, and so he really needs a good job induction. Can I help you craft one for them, or something like that? Not do it. You're not doing it, right? But you're offering to kind of push that along a little bit as a support piece. So you should not be doing individual job trainings of how to do a position. It should be the supervisor over that position that does that. Obviously, if they're in your volunteer team, then you're doing that because you are their supervisor. But other units, that should be somebody else. And that's a perfect world. All right. So you may need a hybrid of that to begin with, depending on your organization. Again, if you have that table of organization with the positions, doesn't matter if they're paid or unpaid, they've now been thoughtfully included in the organization. And at the Red Cross, we were 97% volunteer. Right? And so we had people that supervised other volunteers. We had people that were basic clones of each paid staff position. And so, my chief disaster officer had, 2 people that were partnered with him at his hip, and they basically could function as the chief disaster officer in his absence. Or if we had an event big enough, he could replicate and divide and cover multiple things. So ideally, you have a culture where every single paid position embraces having a volunteer partner that's a clone of themselves, and then that supervisor, embraces the training of other staff. you got to teach them how to do it. That's where that staff development, Friday comes in. But you have to teach those supervisors how to train and how to do job inductions, because they don't usually just come with that skill set. But it's a great topic for that staff development Friday workshop.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Good. Okay.
I have a kind of a follow-up question. Is that okay?
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. So I was also curious. So more recently, I've been kind of starting to divide volunteers into like short-term, long-term volunteers. So I kind of feel like when you're talking about unpaid staff, interviewing them and everything, we're talking more long-term, like ones who want to commit to like more hours than volunteering like once or twice a year. Because then I also have like corporate groups that want to come volunteer with us for certain events and things like that. So I've been kind of breaking them up into that. Do you see any like dangers to that kind of setup with like long-term versus like the short-term type volunteers? Or should I not be thinking of it that way? Yeah, just any suggestions for that type of setup?
You're on the right track. I think you're absolutely on the right track. That's the good news. I think you have to be realistic about the staff that you have, the teams that you have. I do think that there's a lot of business sense in making that distinction. And people could toggle between being a regular volunteer that's registered and being an episodic volunteer. So it doesn't matter what you call them. We call them episodic, reserves, whatever. We had a threshold, and this is what you need to think about: is what's that threshold that actually makes somebody a regular registered volunteer for you, right? And so for us, it was if they did 16 hours of work or they came back more than twice. And so that was our definition. Right. And so if they did 16 hours of work, or if they came back more than twice, then they became a regular registered volunteer in our system. The others were episodic volunteers. Right. And those were project-based, like you said, corporate groups that come in. You're not going to do the application interview and everything for them. Right. They're a group volunteer thing. And so they're going to come in, they're going to do a project, and they're going to leave. And so make that simple for them to engage. You should be able to convert about 1 or 2% of those corporate volunteers into regular volunteers. It's not going to be a high percentage, but 1 to 2% conversion is what I historically have seen. And there's a great chart, and I'll try to find it and give it to Shannon as well. It talks about life milestones and the impact it has. So somebody could be a regular volunteer coming in 3 days a week, and suddenly they decide to build a family, and she gets pregnant. As soon as the baby comes, guess what? You're no longer the priority in their life. The baby is. And so those life-changing events will change their availability and their commitment to the organization. And that's a great example where somebody could go from a regular registered volunteer to now becoming some of your episodic group or your reserve group, whatever you call them. And then maybe when the child grows up and gets to a certain age and starts going to school, now she's bored at home during the day, and so she comes back to be a regular volunteer again. And I've had folks that have cycled back and forth with marriages, deaths and family, children, changes in job, moves, lots of different things that have nothing to do with the organization, but they have an impact on their availability and concentration to do the job. And paid staff are the same way, though. Yeah, I think you're really great also to get that distinction made, because you have limited resources and you need to apply them where you're going to get the most impact, right? And so this way, from a business standpoint, realistically, how many regular registered volunteers do we have, so that you don't have these false expectations, and management knows that, hey, this is where our strengths are and this is where our opportunities are.
Thanks.
Yep. And thank you for stepping up when others wouldn't. They appreciate you for breaking the silence. Yes.
We have 6 minutes left. Does anybody else have any other questions for Scott? Or 5 minutes. Sorry, you just got the 5-minute warning.
I could sing karaoke, but it would not be pretty.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I definitely want to thank you, Scott. I think this has been a really great conversation, and people learned a lot. Like I said, I've worked so many nonprofit jobs, and I have never heard the words coming out of your mouth. And so it's refreshing and gives you a lot to think about. And I know we have a lot of people on this call who are going to take everything you say and put it into practice. So very, very valuable, and we really appreciate your time.
Great. And if you need me to come set your exec straight, just let me know. I'll be happy to come chat with them.
There you go. You got the offer from Scott to come deal with your big bad exec.
That's right.
So, okay, I guess we don't have any other questions, so we'll let everybody go, and I hope you have a great day. And you'll get a follow-up email from me.
Great. If you need anything, let me know. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.